Hey,
Hello.
we will wait until the 3 minutes past the hour for anybody who's rolling in. I know Lauren is supposed to talk about structured results. We'll wait until then. Lauren, this year, I'm going to start the meeting. Hey everyone. Happy New Year to everybody. So please fill the attendees in the Google Doc. Most of us are already. Nobody's new to the meeting. If anybody's new, please introduce yourself. Hey, Michael.
Hello.
We don't have Michael, I believe you came in for the last meeting, right?
Yes, sorry about that. I've locked my screen. Yes.
Okay.
The one before the holidays. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Okay, so I don't see any new faces, but if there are any new people, please introduce yourself. Jeff is writing something about project digital updates. Jeff, do you want to talk about that specifically?
Just to update. Yeah, we're gonna be working on docs the next week or so, trying to get some overhauls there, but that's about it.
Okay, great. Next, we're going to jump on to the agenda. Lauren, do you want to talk about structured results?
Yeah, sure. So structured results is something I brought up in the past, maybe a month ago. So the idea here is that the current JSON results that we have are basically a list. So you have the checks, and then you have a list of results which are strings, and that makes it difficult for people to write automated tools to act upon those results because it's not very structured. So the first PR that I sent is an example. It's basically the changes we have to make to support this new structured results. Naveen, I don't know if you want to share your screen, or maybe I can try to share my screen to show what the new results would look like.
If you don't mind, can you share your screen? I'll stop my share.
Okay. Let me see.
I want to be sure that you get what you want to show, and I don't want to be humbling.
Sure.
Lauren, you muted.
Screen, my audio is not shared. I forgot what the
Okay.
problem is.
Okay, I can. Is that the same PR? Is it on your PR? Just want to make sure.
I think it's
Okay.
2584. It's like,
Let me try and open that up.
2584, yeah, that's correct. I thought yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I want to share my screen so that you can not do that. Yep. Go ahead.
Yeah, so that's the example. So basically what it does, it replaces the old detail, which was an array of strings, and it replaces it with the findings, a finding structure, which is a more fine-grained view of what the results are. So the first field that you see is called the rule. That's basically so every check is basically divided into rules. And each rule is defined with a YAML file, which with all the information about the rule, such as its risk, its remediation, and so on and so forth. So you can think of a rule as like a more granular version of a check, and we're hoping that those rules can explicitly tell people what the result is about. So in this case here, the rule is called GitHub workflow permission top no right, which means that it's the token permission in the workflow are not defined at the top level of the workflow. Navin, maybe after we can look at the YAML file. I'll continue on this. The finding also has so it has a risk, it has an outcome which is either negative, positive, and maybe it could also be like not supported, or yeah, maybe not supported. For example, if you're on GitLab and this rule doesn't apply. The location has the the path to the file, including the line where we found a. In this case, we found a permission set to write. So that gives you the snippet. The idea behind the location is that an automated tool can then take that and display it to their users through a clickable link, so they can visit the original website. The remediation section is, as you can imagine, the remediation. It's supposed to be granular enough so that you have the exact step to remediate. This is something today that we don't have. For example, if you look at the pin dependency check, depending on if it's a Python result or a Dockerfile result, or I don't know, an NPM result, users need to need different remediation steps, and we don't have that, that level of accuracy, or like that level of detail in the remediation section of the check.yaml. So here it will be like, way more accurate, and to try to decrease the time that it takes users to remediate. We also added a effort field under the remediation section to say whether it's low effort, high effort, medium effort, to try to help people to prioritize what they do. The risk levels also is something that we think can help visualization. So you can imagine, for example, Michael, who works on deps.dev, could maybe show all the critical results, all the I don't know, medium results, and use that in combination with the effort to help users prioritize. The reason that we have a risk per rule is because in the past we had, the risk was at the level of a check, but oftentimes in a check, some part of the checks were, maybe critical or like high risk results, and other parts were like low results. So we were not able to adjust the level of the risk when we reported the results. So that's kind of what it looks like. Maybe I can just quickly show the rule.yaml, Navin, and then I can take some questions. So you can go under rule, yeah. Take
Which one do you?
sorry, under rule. Oh, sorry. It's under checks, evaluation, and permissions.
So
Yeah, you can take one of those.
I want to view this raw file just so that
Yeah, that sounds good.
without comments.
So yeah, okay. Yeah. So you can see. So the name of the file is basically the name of the rule. Then we have a description. I might actually remove the short and description field and keep just one because they're basically the same. I added like a motivation field to explain what the check actually does and why it's important. A field for implementation to explain how we implement it if it's relevant to users. And then under the remediation field, you can see the effort and the text. The text is basically an array, and this way we can show it to users as like different steps that they have to follow in order to remediate. So that's kind of all there is to it. I could show you how. Yeah, I think that's the gist of it. So that first PR just basically adds all the plumbing to implement it. Once I have enough feedback, we have enough feedback, and we merge this one in. I think adding support for the other checks will be a little bit easier. There aren't a lot of changes to make. And I think the main challenge is to define, what a rule should be so that it's kind of stable over time. For example, here I called the rule, no top level permissions defined. So I think I could also have called it default permissions. But I took the view that later on we might want to have another rule that says, does the org level default permission, what is the org level permission that the org has set through the API settings? Is it read or is it write? And I think this way we could differentiate between everything that users might want to, to take, everything they might need to make a judgment call on the results.
So I think that is that's maybe like implementation detail for like per org. The rule, I mean, maybe has a name that is some concatenation of like rule, outcome, risk, or whatever fields we want to add in, right? So it's like permissions, top level, high, blah blah blah, right? But yeah, we should decide on what the schema looks like before slotting it in.
Lauren, are you ready to take questions?
Yeah. I'm waiting for questions.
Okay, sure. First of all, this is a breaking change. This is a breaking change. So from our schema result, so this has to be next version. We need to just setting some saying, hey, we cannot, because this is even for our API and for our, we're doing V4, this has to become V5. So that's something that we want to keep in mind when we want to do this in, because that is going to be one thing which is going to come in for everybody. I really like the way that's coming up. I am not a fan of strings, at least I know it's implementation, but I'm not a big fan of negative, positive being strings. It's hard for somebody to, but other than that, I like the location where the things are, because that is a great thing. But the risk being high, low makes sense for human beings usually. It's really good. But other than that, I still have to review the PR, but from the friendly, high level. It looks nice.
Yeah, if I can-
Spencer?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, just trying to piggyback off of Naveen's comment about strings. I commented on the PR, but I wanted to highlight that some people have talked about having like an integer ID for a rule. So there's some discussion on that too in the PR, but just wanted to bring that up.
Agree.
Yeah,
interesting.
I'd like to have some feedback because I think integers, like I'd like to better understand why integers are better, because I think for a human, integers are going to be harder to read.
But if you're writing automation, numbers are easier to, because nobody's going to manually look at this YAML, my 2 cents. Or the JSON, people are going to write some automation to, oh, if it's 4, I need to go do this. So writing strings, oh, do I need to uppercase it? If we change our casing for whatever reason that breaks somebody else. So numbers are easier, my 2 cents.
Okay.
Yeah, agreed too. I would, Naveen beat me to it, but yes, +1 to the whole, it's a breaking change. It's a reasonably large breaking change. We're dropping fields out of structs, we're adding new packages, etc. I think there's a way to reason about this where we bring it into, I think we need a larger discussion about, I think we've brought it up in the past, but like what, do we respect Semper? Like, like what happens when an API changes? How do we message that? And how do people proceed if they're consuming it at V4? There's a way to reason about this where we could stick a lot of this into a, use if you dare package, something that is experimental, and bring that in slowly but surely as we're testing it around. But I think one of the things that you run into when you're incorporating a large change is that we're saying right now at a baseline it's V5, but if it doesn't come in at some point, it's gonna, you're gonna have the task of trying to continually make sure that the PR stays up to date until you can land it for a V5. So like that suggests, is it an experimental package? Is it a V5 tracking branch, feature branch, whatever you want to call it? How do we talk about that? Because I imagine that we'll have more large PRs that we don't want to become stale.
Yeah, I can comment on this. So regarding the API, I think Naveen, you meant like the REST API and the BigQuery, this sort of thing.
Yes, the REST API and the BigQuery. That's a change for anybody who wrote some automation. Oh, this is the structure.
So let's simplify. Hold on, let's simplify, because like this, anything that we have exposed is the API, right? So anything that is in this repo that is an exported method type, etc., is part of our API. However, people consume it, whether it's in BigQuery, what have you. If someone is writing a package built on top of Scorecard, like Scorecard Action, that's part of their API.
Okay, so I'll start with the REST API. I don't see this format replacing the old one. I think it would be a different one, and the API would just. I haven't chatted with you or Azim or how it's done now, but I don't think we would deprecate the old results, simply because I think some users might actually prefer when they run on the CLI that it gives them strings rather than this big blob of data, because that's a lot harder to read for a human. So that's for the REST API. Regarding the API,
sorry, I still didn't understand. So what you're saying is we still keep the old one for the REST?
Yeah, I think there would be a transition, and maybe at some point we deprecate generating the old BigQuery table, like
Okay.
the format.
Sure.
And then we transition to this one, but the same way that we did it between V1 and V2, where we actually kept the BigQuery, we never like killed the format. We just created a new BigQuery. So I think that's how I would.
So that's what you envision, wherein we still keep generating the old format, but probably have a /v2, just be an example, on the on the FQDN with this new result, so people can get. At some point, stop that. Okay, agree. That's a good
Yeah,
idea.
that's how I see it. For the API that Scorecard has, so in terms of stale, a different branch, what Stefan says, I think once this PR is merged, it should be pretty easy to, it's not going to break like the rest of the code. I think it can live in the same code base. I know it's not very explicit on our README, but I don't think Scorecard guarantees anything Semver wise for the API that we have, like the Go API. I mean, I don't think we've made this claim. I know we haven't been very explicit about it, but I don't think we guarantee Semver for the API itself.
So I think every time this conversation comes up, we kind of get to the same place, and I think where we need to get to is we should be explicit
Yes,
about what the
totally
guarantee
agree.
is. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we should have a section on the README and say that Semver is for maybe the output format on the CLI, the BigQuery table, the REST API, but not for the Go API. I think, yeah, we should have done that earlier.
Lauren, can you take an action item to do a PR to README for that, please, so that we put a nail on that.
Yeah, that sounds good. Okay, yeah, I'll do that. If there's no other question, I also wanted to ask a little bit about whether people think we should keep the score as part of this new structure, or do people think that we should get rid of them? So
actually, Laurent, I did have a few questions.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, this is Varun. So actually, I've not been following up on this particular issue, so this might be a bit basic, but this is still Sarif, or is this like a custom format?
No, it's a custom JSON format. It's trying to basically it expands the details, I guess, if you will. When you do minus format JSON on the CLI. So it's not Sarif. It's not Sarif.
So I'm just wondering, I mean, is there, like, if it was Sarif, then would it have, would it still be able to meet the requirements that you have for it? Because Sarif, I think, is more of a standard format for tool output, right?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think not a lot of people read Sarif format or support it. But yeah, I guess that could be a broader question.
I mean, one of the patterns that I've seen is like, for example, in the GitHub starter workflows, there's the whole code scanning section. And I think Scorecard is also there. And I think they probably require tools to upload the results to the GitHub code scanning API, which I think accepts only Sarif, or I don't know if it accepts, because that's how it actually gets Scorecard results get shown in the GitHub action, right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, we have a Sarif. You can select the Sarif format for the output. Yes.
Varun, just to answer, there's no breaking change to Sarif. This is
No,
only for JSON.
There's no breaking changes, and in fact, even for JSON, there is no breaking changes if we create a new format and we call it something different. Right now, I called it extended JSON, but we can come up with a better.
Yeah. So I think if I can try to interpret Varun, what you said, I think it's a why not Sarif, or why not closer to Sarif, if we know that is a standard that other tools are going to be ingesting already. And I think it's a great question.
Yeah, and actually related to that, because when there was this discussion about the rule ID, so Sarif actually has a property for that, which is rule ID, and they have some sort of guidance around it. Let me actually try to paste that here. So, so I'm just wondering, like, if there's already work done in terms of, whatever problems this is trying to solve, maybe the Sarif, group has done work to solve those problems. And so we're just wondering if, in fact, I didn't even know whether it's Sarif or not. So I was just trying to understand.
No, I mean, that's a good question. I think Serif is a standard. It's a huge standard. Virtually nobody actually implements it fully. So GitHub only implements and understands a subset of Serif. And I think because it's so big and so complicated that no one, I mean, there are very few tools that actually read it. And that's my understanding. So I don't know if it's been super successful as a format. Yes, I guess that's sort of my answer. I think there are some similarities here where we're trying to express similar results.
So, I mean, with that said, I do think it's worthwhile to see if we can map what we want. Yeah, and I was just about to link that to you, Spencer. Thank you. In the notes is a link to the GitHub docs about code scanning and Serif support for code scanning. If we have concepts that overlap, even if it's a subset of the Serif implementation, I think it'd be worthwhile to consider doing that. Instead of because like even when we reference extended JSON is defined in other places as well as not being this. So where there are specs defined, let's try to adhere to them and being careful with the nomenclature, because extended JSON is a thing elsewhere.
Varun, do you have other questions on this?
The only other comment I had was, go ahead. The only other thing I had was about the rule ID that, I've seen that the rule ID doesn't necessarily have to be a number as long as it, it sort of stays the same. And because sometimes it's also intuitive for someone to be able to see a rule ID. Like here is an example from CodeQL. And I think some of the other tools use like, alphabets dash number. So just wanted to mention that. Yeah, that's all.
Thanks, Varun. Lauren, do you have all the necessary things? Is this good? Can we go to the next?
Yeah, I think if I'll take a look at the CodeQL rules. Some other question I wanted to ask is whether people think we should keep the score in this new format, and whether we should also keep the checks, because I think some people have expressed interest, or at least have discussed whether we need to have a result with a flat list of findings without having this nested check structure that I currently reuse from the earlier JSON format we had. Just wonder if people have thoughts on this. If we removed it, I guess we might still need a new field in the finding that says check is blah blah blah. But I wanted to know whether people think it would simplify the format or whether it's a bad idea.
So you mean to just see the score within the
Oh, no,
overall?
I meant remove the check array. So right now you can see. So for the score, like remove
sure.
the score entirely, and for the
Okay.
check, just remove the check array and just have a list of findings, an array of findings.
All right. And so my ignorance. So if I want the score and the finding, it's not possible.
Well, if we remove the score, it would not be possible.
Yeah.
Which is why I'm asking.
Yeah, right. Thinking a little further down, if we intend, say the example, we intend to replace our standard JSON with this extended JSON, then bringing that field in is better, but having the score should not cause any major storage. It's not that it's going to blow up. I rather have it. Oh, then I can get this JSON and then I can figure out what was scorecard score and then decide what do I need to do. So that would be a good addition to have. My 2 cents on that.
Yeah, same. I would prefer more data and to slice and dice it as necessary.
So question I have is, do you already have a consumer of this output? Like who's going to consume this?
I think Michael on the call would be the first consumer. So Michael works on the devs.dev project, and they've had issues on, making the scorecard results. Like they've had a hard time showing users their results besides the just dumping the details of the current results. So this is supposed to help them. And we've had discussion with them about what they would need, what would help. So yeah, I think Michael would be the first consumer. I don't know if you have anything to add, Michael.
I mean, I do think that it's good in general to have a little bit more structure to it because it does make it easy to reason about it. And yeah, yes, short version. Certainly in terms of compatibility, I think that that transition, depending if it's a major version bump, just handling it appropriately. We haven't looked too much at Serif yet, which is something I will be looking a bit more at. So,
and I'm sorry, go for it.
Sorry, I'm done.
And I'm looking at the page that Spencer shared. Towards the bottom is Serif output examples, and the example with minimum required properties. And I'm sure that we get to a format like that because our results are displayable in GitHub. But like looking through that seems reasonable, and I think we're pretty close there if we were to adopt the format.
And to add to Varun's question, Varun, I spoke to at least a couple of them in the member summit, and people wanted just not text. People wanted raw data, something like this. And they were interested in getting the data. So I don't know if they would be ready to adopt, but this was a feedback that I got from a few people speaking about Scorecard. Okay, if we don't have any more questions on this, I'm going to move forward to the next topic. Okay. The next topic is okay. Action to use the API to get comments on updates and dependency changes. This is something that I have been working on. I'm going to show a demo of what it is. So right now, again, this came up in speaking to a couple of customers in the summit. People are flying blind. If there's a new dependency change, people are like, I don't know how great this dependency is. And Laurent had somebody, I forgot the name, intern work on this specifically for their project. So I took that idea, but I couldn't reuse any of the code. The whole goal is to, if there's any dependency change to your project, wouldn't it be nice to get a scorecard score on the dependency change? So it makes people warm and fuzzy to say, okay, now I'm bringing this new dependency. What happens? Does it have a binary file in there? Does it have a pin dependency? What is the score on any of that? It'd be nice to know So I wrote some code up. So here's an example. This is scorecard action. So what it does is, just to give some perspective, it changes some dependencies. It makes some dependency change. And I also specifically imported a blank import on Go, because this dependency has a vulnerability. So, and this dependency is not scanned by Scorecard because this is an old repository and Scorecard does not scan this. So this is a common use case. People want to bring in, update few dependencies. People want to bring in an existing repo, but it's not scanned by Scorecard. So ideally, we would want to know, if I was trying to consume Scorecard, I don't want all the checks. I could be picking, hey, I just want 2 checks to know what the data is about this. And if there's no Scorecard data, but if there is any vulnerability, I want to know that information. And all of this is used only one API call to GitHub, which gives dependency def. So by calling that API, providing between 2 commit SHAs, it will give the list of dependency diffs between these 2 and specifically calling out what dependencies got added, what dependencies got removed. And this potential feature that I'm thinking of bringing in is only for new dependency that we add, because people are only interested in knowing about what has changed, what the score is. So here's the example. So this is how, so I configure the API check or to only two checks, binary artifacts and pin dependency, because I don't want everything. So just to show this is configurable. So just those 2. And here is the actual API call to Scorecard that somebody can click and look at the result. And though there were changes to adding robots and pencils go SAML, that one didn't have any Scorecard API results because it's not being scanned and that repository is not being updated in the last 4 years. But that has a high critical vulnerability. So this is an example of somebody can configure what checks they are interested in to show those score. And I don't want to, my thought process, I'll wait for to not to dump. We can obviously configure what we want to show and what we don't want to show, but showing this highlights the reason why I just showed this is I opened a PR to forgot one of the dependency update tools. Lauren, do you know which tool that was? It wasn't Dependabot. It was the other one. Sorry, I'm going blank.
Renovate?
Oh, Renovate. Yeah,
Renovate,
I opened.
Renovate,
Yeah,
yeah.
Renovate. Yeah, Renovate. So I opened a PR to Renovate to say, hey, why don't you bring in some kind of information? And they specifically said, having too much information on a PR is not advisable. People don't want to read. So I said, okay, that makes sense. So the goal, the first thing is, before going down the rabbit hole, does anybody find this is not a good idea?
I would ask, so I linked the dependency review action. I know that this is a subset of potential functionality, but I linked the dependency review action to maybe ask, where's the overlap? Does it make sense for us to, if there is equivalent functionality? Not to say, I mean, not everyone is on GitHub and necessarily using this stuff, but potential thing that we could leverage if we don't need to reinvent the wheel.
And so the dependency review API just gives the it gives two information. It says, what are the new dependencies that have changed? And it also gives vulnerabilities. So that's why I was able to use that to pull that information. It's up to, obviously there's not set in stone. I'm just showing what can be. But dependency review API does not query the scorecard API to get results. And I'm just stitching both these things together to provide this information.
Oh, okay, got it. Thanks.
Okay. So if there's nobody objecting, then I'll go forward and go with the next step, which is my next thought process in this is obviously one of the things that I already talked to Laurent in this is obviously I want to keep this only in action. I'm talking to implementation right now. I want to keep this only in action because this is very much tied to GitHub dependency API. I don't want to put this in scorecard. Lauren, Spencer, do you guys have specific comments on that? Or anybody? Sorry, I didn't mean to be specific.
I would have mixed feelings about it, especially if it's related. I mean, if it's only supportable, potentially only supportable on a platform that everyone might not be on, because I know there's support being built for GitLab as well, or it's in experimental.
Yeah, it's in experimental.
Yeah.
So that's why keeping this code base only in action, not in scorecard. So essentially, if we decide to add this to GitLab and XYZ, then potentially move that into scorecard, but keep this simple enough. This is not an extremely large code base. So this is about probably, I would say about 500, 600 lines of code. But my thought process to keep this only in scorecard action.
Yeah, I think it's a good test bed as long as we make sure that it doesn't get weaved too deeply into the core logic of scorecard action. To just make sure we like tightly write it.
Sure. Yep. Is
I'm
anybody?
actually just trying to understand, the various layers of this solution. So is this like going to parse out all the different kinds of these package manager files, like for the Go mod and npm?
It's not, we are not parsing. We like scorecard does not parse it. That's what the GitHub dependency API provides that out of the box. So I give two commit shards for the repository. It says, hey, are there any dependencies updated? If it's updated, it tells me what those dependencies are. I take those lists, I parse that out, go to scorecard API and say, hey, what's the score on that? Please dump that information as a GitHub comment.
So that means that even to get the list of dependencies, you are using a GitHub API.
Yes.
And does that like return you in terms of the package type? Like, does it give the ecosystem?
Yes, it gives the ecosystem, it gives the what was added, what was removed, everything. It gives all that. So essentially, and what's the source repository? We take the source repository, we hope it's GitHub, we just think if it's GitHub, hey, then we take that, go look at the API. If you can't find nothing in the API, we're not going to dump anything. That's the whole.
To understand, like, does this also work for private repositories, like, or is it like a paid thing for private repository, or is it just part of the GitHub API, which is
very good question. I don't know whether, but it's part of the GitHub API. So it's part of the GitHub API. I don't know whether for private repositories how it works, probably what features it provide. I don't know about that.
It depends is the short version. So yeah, it's part of the GitHub API. It depends on how much. Yeah, it depends on what functionality you have turned on. So I believe that you have to have advanced security and
Yes, correct.
GitHub
Yes.
Connect enabled. And it will also be dependent on what server version of GitHub Enterprise Server, if you're using Enterprise Server, that you have configured. So
I would say that, this approach, then it's good for open source projects, but as a general software, won't it get limited? Like if you have to have advanced security enabled to be able to use it in a private repo.
Good thing. If we are thinking of even CodeQL for the matter, you need to have paid advanced security for you to run CodeQL, which Scorecard goes and dings if you can use that. So we can go down this rabbit hole of trying to say which is and which is not, but I'm not saying that we should not look for that, but we're going to make this configurable. We can turn on and turn off so that it does not error out. If somebody can and want this feature, they should be able to use that. But at least we provide them an option to do that. Right now, they're flying blind.
What I'm trying to understand, what I'm trying to understand, like if the job to be done is basically to get the dependency information, then if we use some open source software to do that, then we take away the, then it becomes more reusable. It can be used.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But if you see this, somebody has to now adding more dependency on whether they are maintaining those packages. Those things become problem. GitHub is an enterprise they have a revenue model to maintain this because they want to add new features, make it stable. Now we, depending on someone else, brings, are you having support for Python? Are you having support for PyPy? Do you have support for this? But GitHub as a revenue model, this is what they're building on. Obviously swapping, that's only one function. Like that's only one function.
Let me interject a little bit, because Varun, before you jumped in, I was going to kind of touch on this. There is a bit of an incentive towards open source or public repositories, right? So for CodeQL, you can use CodeQL without the license as long as the repo is public, right? If you have a private repository, that's when you've got to get the advanced security, you've got to click the buttons, you've got to pay the money. So there is some incentive towards having publicly available open source code and getting some of this additional functionality out of GitHub as a result. I think that is a reasonable model. And I think that, at least by restricting this within the context of the scorecard action, it means you're likely running through the same workflow, right? There are things in scorecard that you won't necessarily need to be able to do if you won't get as robust results if you're dealing with a private repository already, right? So as long as we're setting the expectation of like what needs to be, what buttons need to be turned on or what things need to be paid for, I think it's fine, especially given that it's restricted into this kind of scorecard action namespace, as it were.
Yep. Adding to what Stephen mentioned, right now, if you want to run scorecard on a private repository, it's going to write to SAR, which is an advanced security feature. So you need that.
One of the suggestions I had is, for example, this OSV scanner, which recently from Google, which is like this open. So I think that also does parsing of a lot of these package manager files, and I was just wondering if that is actually being used. In fact, that is sort of mentioned here, but I don't know if it's a dependency or is it because that, if you take a dependency of that and it is parsing a lot of these package managers, then it's
correct. But it's a valid point. I'm not saying, but probably for V1, we can think of using the GitHub, but probably for V2, we can see like, okay, how can we replace this? That's my take, because scorecard action cannot be run on a private repo if you don't have advanced security. So especially now these being namespace too, that's my take, because now adding another dependency and coming back at what to, rather giving this as a feature. That's why I want to, that's a reason I'm thinking that this should not be a big blocker. My 2 cents on that.
So I feel like I'm being the contrarian today. But I have kind of the opposite, or maybe a different take. Is evaluate options before implementation, and try to make like understand good fit. I think OSV scanner is a potential good fit, and it will potentially remove some of the barriers for people who may not be on systems where they can enable what they need to have that. So we should look at OSV scanner, especially because we probably also know the people who are involved in maintaining it, before doing any implementation. I think it's a reasonable request.
I think there's one limitation of OSV scanner, that it understands packages, but it doesn't understand the mapping between a package and a repo. Unless it's for maybe Golang, because we can
Yep.
infer the repository from the package name. And I think that's what that GitHub API is providing.
Right.
I think deps.dev also has a similar API, I think. But I think there's some logic behind where they look at stars and downloads and they say, okay, this is coming. This repo seems to be the source of truth. Because I think sometimes people also fork projects and they don't change the source hint that they have in their NPM. So you end up with a lot of packages that are supposedly from the same repo. I mean, there's just something to be aware of, that the
Sure.
mapping is what I think that API is giving us, that maybe OSV doesn't support. But I haven't looked in detail.
Right. We have next 8 minutes, so I'm gonna run with this. Okay, so so the next step in this is I'm gonna do a PR to scorecard action so that we can get eyes. So first of all, next thing is I want to keep it as a comment so that it's one comment, so people can keep it easy, simple. They can squish and they can see, oh, what it is each one is, instead of it being hundreds of comments. So if they don't like it, and one of the things, Lauren, do you think this should be part of the existing action, or should this be, because that means we got to run this in PRs and scorecard. If it runs on, if we enable scorecard and PR, people could run into rate limiting issues.
Yeah, I think I'll let people discuss what they think. If I understand correctly, if this runs on PRs, the only API request is to the that GitHub API about the dependencies, but everything else would be pulling data from the BigQuery or REST
Not from
API.
BigQuery, from the REST API.
Okay, so the only rate limiting problem would be from that additional API, or are you also saying that, oh, maybe the running scorecard today on PRs has that limitation and people are already running into that problem?
Yes, because now if scorecard is usually configured for on a merge or something, but it's now if we're going to enable with PRs, they're gonna hit into rate limiting, scorecard constantly rate limiting issues. And so that's why I want to avoid that, keep this simple, keep it clean, wherein. But one downside is now we need to request a lot more people to go install this. That's the only downside to that. But in the long run, it will avoid rate limiting issues. That's why I see it as keeping it as a separate action within the scorecard action as whatever name. I'm not great with naming, so that's my thought process.
So I would strongly suggest, like, let's start this as a discussion, like open it up for discussion, because I do think there should be some evaluation of something like OSV scanner before we start implementation, even before getting to the rate limiting stuff.
Why would OSV scanner has to do with this?
As a potential backing solution, is what I'm saying. So Laurent was.
So the OSV scanner is about it's about specifically parsing the dependencies. Is that the blocker?
Sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, I'm saying, I think a blocker to implementation should be evaluating options. That's all I'm saying. So I'm saying, I think this should start as a discussion before implementation. We're gonna get more feedback of whether people even want this. Because it doesn't make sense to implement something that people aren't necessarily excited about.
Okay, I can open a PR and we can have a discussion. Should not be a problem on that specifically.
For the GitHub action, Naveen, one of the other things to consider is that if you're planning to create the PR comment using the GitHub token, then I think it's also going to need the the pull request write permission for that. So that's another thing to consider.
Okay,
So if someone wants to opt into this, then the documentation will have to say that.
sure, right.
If you all,
That's a good idea. So that also makes a better reason to keep it as a separate PR, so that like a separate action, so that we keep them separation. So if people want, they can opt in and need that. But that's a good comment, Varun. Thanks.
yeah, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say that it's enough to make it a separate, because a separate action is going to take a whole lot of effort for adoption, and if it is related, so I think there has to be more analysis, but there are like pros
Sure.
and cons of it.
I agree. I will open it up as for issues so that we can discuss about it.
Yeah, a discussion would be great, because I think agree that a separate action is more work. And this is good documentation, and this is just setting the expectation that you will have to change permissions if you want to use this. I think is reasonable.
Laurent, sorry, we are 3 minutes into it. If we merge, I know these are like one of the things that I was also talking about is, I know we should probably talk about when is that you want to release, like all of these things together, is we were talking about in the last meeting, is we probably want in Q1 set a date and try towards it, because it makes it easier as to what we want to release and put that together.
Is that a question for me? I guess we can have tentative dates when we have something we think.
Yeah. No, not just for this, but as like, hey, here's Q1, March, April, something like that.
So shall we create milestones on the scorecard repo? Do we use milestones today?
So we haven't, but we can create milestone V5 and go with that. And then we put in probably.
We do have a milestone. I don't think we've been planning for the milestones. So there are milestones in GitHub though.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, maybe that's something we can use and improve on, and maybe have them in the README saying this is the roadmap of what we think we would like to achieve in the next 3 to 6 months.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
Something I wanted to ask is, maybe that's a question for Spencer or people who know more, but are there any ways that we can reduce the problem around API rate limiting for scorecard running on pull request? Or is this just going to be hard in general?
My 2 cents, it's going to be hard because Scorecard does. And it's based on how often pull requests come into the repo. If a repo has active pull requests, then it's a problem.
I don't know. I think it would help if we could specify in the action, and I don't think we can, so correct me if I'm wrong, but if we can specify the checks that run in the scorecard action, because some are a lot worse than others. There are some that hit 30 API requests for a certain check, but a lot of them use the GraphQL API. So if it's one GraphQL API and we get, the majority of the checks, is that good enough? So
I think also, yeah, if we also have like contacts with Dependabot, it would be good to tag, because when Dependabot reviews hit, or they're doing triggers for updating PRs and stuff like that, how they're managing that.
So something I can mention is that on pull request, Scorecard doesn't run any of the API, the checks that rely on APIs. So if somehow we are hitting those rate limiting because of the API calls, it means that we are basically not being very smart on how we query GraphQL, and we're basically querying everything, even things that we don't need. So maybe we can make it a bit more granular. So because like Scorecard should only need the, cloning the repo and then basically looking at the code. Those are the only checks that we turn on pull request for Scorecard, at least right now.
Also, if the problem is that multiple workflows start off, like I'm not sure I understand the problem, but there is a way to set a concurrency, right? So that you just run one at a time.
Can you say that again, Baron?
Like, is the problem with pull requests is that there are a lot of pull requests, and so it runs Scorecard multiple times, and so there is a way to set concurrency in a workflow, and I'm wondering if that might solve the problem. So in that case, let me give the documentation.
Let's also maybe take this to chat since we're at time, or we're
Yep.
past time.
Yep. Yes. So for the next meeting, does anybody else want to volunteer?
Yeah, sure. If no one wants to do it, but if we
What
have
date it is? All right. And then we know what date it's going to be.
28,
28.
26, I guess.
Okay, 26. All right, you're right.
Sounds good.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
See ya.
See you next 2 weeks.
Thank you.
Later.
Bye.